Hello, Cambrian Park Church family. It's good to be with you again this morning. I wanted to shoot a video that captures some important information about the vision that I've been sensing that God's been leading us on and for us to consider as we move forward as a church. And I wanted to encourage you to take a look at this video in preparation of a town hall meeting that we're going to have on Sunday, April the 19th. We'll be doing that in the place of our Zoom call worship service on the 19th, starting at 10 a.m. Our district superintendent, Albert Hung, will be with us on that call, and it'll be a town hall meeting where I'm able to, along with Albert, to be able to process and to discuss some things related to this particular vision. And so I wanted to encourage you to watch this video, and also the link that was, the email that I'll send you that has this link to the video, I'm also going to send you a document that looks like this. It'll have a variety of these slides listed for you that you can download. The picture screen may be a little bit hard to see for some of you, and so I want to encourage you to download the slides in a paper format if you'd like to follow along as you're watching the video. So just want to encourage you in that way as well. So I want to jump right into this and share with you some thoughts that I've had on vision and direction for our church moving forward. So to start, I just want to clarify right up front that as a church, as a people who follow Jesus, a people who live under God's authority and lordship, we recognize that God is a God of mission, and that God has always been on a mission. That's what the scriptures teach us from bookend to bookend, is that God has been a part of this mission to redeem and restore humanity since the fall. Early in Genesis, when sin entered the world, all the way to Revelation, God is in this process of redemption and restoration for people, and it's God's great mission in the world. And when we think about ourselves as a church, a lot of times we think about the church in terms of an institution, and we try to say things like the church has a particular mission, like a business would have a mission statement. But the reality is that the church is a unique enterprise, a unique movement, in the sense that the mission has already been given to the church. Jesus gave us the mission, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute in Matthew chapter 28. And so a better way to think about mission is the way I've captured it here, is that the mission has a church. So God's mission has a church. God's mission has a people to carry out that mission. And so it's not that the church has a specific mission, but the church exists because of the mission of God. That's why we exist, is because of God's mission to redeem and restore humanity. And so, as we talked about just a minute ago, the mission of the church, or the mission that the church has, is that we're called to go and make disciples. And this is found in Matthew 28, verse 19. As you can see, Jesus very clearly gave us this commission that we are called to go and make disciples. And so let's break this down. Very clearly, he says that the mission that the church is called to engage in is this a very strong going sense of mission, that we are called to go. It's an active participation that we're going. And that indicates, by the nature of the fact that we're going as a people, that we are sent. That God has sent us into the world. And so that's a huge part of the mission, is an understanding of our sent nature, our need to go. He also talks about what we're to go and to do, and we're to go and to make disciples, very specifically to make disciples. And so disciples are really people that follow Jesus, people whose lives are looking more like Jesus. And a life that looks more like Jesus is someone who is more devoted to loving God. As you can see in Matthew chapter 22, when Jesus is asked the greatest commandment, and Jesus says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so there's this sense that a disciple is fully committed and devoted and loving and growing in their loving relationship with God, that it's an ongoing, vibrant, abiding relationship. And so a disciple is someone who is embodying that God-centered life. A disciple is also someone who's sacrificially loving other people. And that great commandment, when Jesus was asked, what's the great commandment? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then he said, the second is like it, love your neighbors yourself. And so disciples are people who look like Jesus. And Jesus was a person who was completely devoted to loving his Father and lived in an abiding relationship, ongoing, obedient relationship with him. And he was one that was sacrificially loving other people in just crazy, abundant ways. And so disciples are people who model and live out this kind of life. And these are the kind of people we're supposed to be, and the kind of people that we're supposed to be involved in the process of making and forming. But what's also interesting here is that a disciple is also someone who is not only devoted to loving God and sacrificially love other people, but a disciple is also involved in the process in that going process. So when someone goes and begins to make disciples that look like this, then that new disciple then is put back into a sent posture where they're then sent to go and to repeat this process for it to continue. And so that's an understanding of kind of what the mission of God is, how it relates to the church, and what the church is called to be and to do, to go and to make disciples. And so the question then for us is, what is the best way to achieve this particular mission? If this is what the church is supposed to be about going and making disciples that look and operate like this, then what's the best way for us to achieve that mission? Well, currently, what we do is we currently try to achieve this mission in the church in general, and not just our church, but most churches in America, by centering our expression of what the church is and what it's supposed to be about around a Sunday morning worship service that takes place in a building. This is a lot of how we orient ourselves. We think that to go and make disciples, where it starts is by creating a worship experience on a Sunday morning in a building that people come to. And so that's what we do. We create a Sunday morning worship service. And a Sunday morning worship service really has, I would say, professional leadership. And so this is where you pay a pastor, you pay a worship leader to lead us in times of worship and a message. And so it's very professionally driven, people that are paid to do it. It's mostly a spectator event. Most people can come and sit in a pew or in a chair and they can just witness what's going on, and they don't have to really be that involved. They can just kind of spectate. They can consume what they're receiving as a consumer on Sunday morning. It's mostly a come and see event, so it's something that you have to come to experience. Remember that this is an interesting nuance, because remember the mission of the church is to go and make disciples, and yet our primary form of how we operate exists around a model generally that's about asking people to come to us as opposed to us going to people. And so that's what a worship service does. It creates an environment where you have to come to it to experience it. And then out of that worship service, we do a lot of great things. We point people to get involved in outreach. We point people to get involved in times of fellowship. Maybe we have a food hour, or we have these special fellowship events that we do once a week or once a month. We encourage people to get involved in small groups or Bible studies. We encourage people to maybe join a Sunday school class and get involved with that. We may encourage people to get involved in other training classes to grow in their walk with Jesus. We might also have children's programs that we develop as a result of this. And we also have youth programs that come out of this as well. But what you can notice is that generally speaking, we allow the Sunday morning worship service to be the primary driver of how we do ministry as a church, how we're intending to accomplish the mission of the church. We start with a worship service, and then we pour things, good things, that we pour out of it. But we really want people to start here. And so my question is, and I think as we think about the church moving forward, is that the most effective way for us to accomplish the mission to go and make disciples, is to center everything around a worship service? What if our focus wasn't to start with a worship service, but to equip people towards a decentralized expression of the church on mission? Okay? What if we didn't start with a worship service, but we started with equipping people towards decentralized expressions of the church on mission? What does this look like? Well, what if we, as a church, looked more like this? What if we existed to equip and train, which is what the scriptures teach us what we're called to do in the church, is to equip and train people for the work of God and for the mission of God? And what if we were to equip and train people to then be expressions of the church in the local community? So instead of coming to church, we're equipping people more to be the church. And so then we release people into these smaller entities. We can maybe call them micro churches, where each of these groups are very centered around going and being. They're very centered around their sent nature of being a disciple of Jesus, sent into the world to go and make disciples. And so each of these micro churches has a specific mission that they're trying to accomplish, a way in which God is leading them to bring about his kingdom on this planet. And so each of these groups then would be equipped and trained, and we would launch them and send them, and we would encourage everybody in the life of our church and those not yet in the life of our church to see this as their primary form or expression of church, to be involved in a micro church setting, which more closely, I think, resembles a New Testament model of the church, where these individuals are actually going and being the church in a very tangible, practical way. And what if this became then our primary emphasis? Remember, we said that the worship service generally is our main driver for how we do ministry. What if this became the primary model that we invested in? This was the focal point that we started with, was an equipping model to equip and release people into these kinds of missional expressions of the church. And then what if a secondary emphasis was having some semblance of a worship gathering that existed? Right? You can see the change, like the shift here, because currently right now, this is the primary emphasis, and then we give secondary emphasis to maybe other expressions of how we want to operate as a church. But this would flip the paradigm or flip the model on its head. And it would say, no, let's be more about equipping and training people to be involved in missional orientations of the church. And then let's let our worship service be an encouragement to that, and a secondary emphasis to this being the primary way that we operate and do ministry as a church. And so let me take a moment and just share with you, because you're probably asking, I've shared a little bit about what a micro church is. Let me to break this down a little bit for us this morning, or this afternoon, or whatever time it is you're watching this. So what is a micro church? So a micro church is the church in its most simple form, its simplest expression. A micro church is also formed, as I mentioned, around a particular mission. And so, for example, micro churches could be formed very, very intently about reaching a particular neighborhood with the hope and the love of Jesus. Micro churches could be formed around a call to minister and incarnate the love of Jesus to those that are homeless, those that are involved in the sex trafficking, girls that are being sold into the sex trafficking industry. I mean, the list of opportunities is endless in terms of the ways in which micro churches could be formed around a particular type of mission. And then micro churches are launched in an effort to assist people to be the church. That's why it's so important, is that we want to get everybody involved in some expression of the micro church so that people are released to be the church, to be the people of God that are going and making disciples, as Jesus tells us in Matthew 28. And so micro churches then are committed to being a holistic expression of the church. That a micro church in its simplest form is the church. It's not a lesser form of the church, but it's its most purest form of the church. Its most simple expression and most beautiful expression, and probably the closest resembles what Jesus desired and desires for the church. And so micro churches would be committed to particular mission, like they would be committed to the mission of going and making disciples in a very specific and unique way. Micro churches would also be involved together in some aspect of worship, where they are worshiping together and they're encouraging one another in their worship and their dependency and abiding relationship with God. And they're also involved in community together as the church. They are loving God together, they're loving each other together, and they are being formed and mobilized to be a part of this mission together that they're endeavoring to be a part of as that expression of the micro church. And so you can see here an example of what this might look like, kind of the DNA of a micro church. It's a group of people that is the church, that are the church, that are centered around a particular mission. And as a result of being centered around that mission, they are deeply connected in their relationship with God, with Him personally and with each other, where they are worshiping and loving Him. And this is beyond just singing songs. This is a life of worship. Romans 12:2, right? Your life is a living sacrifice, our spiritual act of worship, that our lives are given in worship to God, and that we are operating in community, not just lone rangers on an island by ourselves, but we're doing this in community. And you can see this is a cycle. This is the DNA of what a microchurch would look like. And so how do we get there? What to expect? What might this look like for us in the life of our church? I know we're in unprecedented times right now with the COVID-19 restrictions that are in place and the sheltering in place. And so all of this stuff is very preliminary, but I wanted to give you just some general ideas of examples of what might happen over the next 3 years in the context and the life of our church as we attempt to move towards a model similar to what I've described here just in this past 10, 15 minutes or so. So how do we get here? Year one, well, we would probably continue to have our Sunday morning worship services. We would continue to do those. Right now we're doing those in a virtual format through sermons online on YouTube, and also with our Zoom calls on Sunday morning. And that may be continually being updated. That's just how things are at the time of this video that I'm filming this. But we would also have a big focus this first year as a church to be focused deeply on prayer and seeking the Holy Spirit together as a church for this future direction for our church, that God would lead us and guide us, and that we would come together as a community to really seek God's direction in this way. There would be a lot of development that I would begin doing with our board, our church board, in helping us get all on the same page in terms of our mission and our vision as a church, to align ourselves in some of the ways that I've talked about here. We would begin to launch discipleship classes on spiritual formation and missional development, very intentionally oriented around helping people understand their role as a disciple, what it means to be a disciple, what it means to be a disciple on mission, what it looks like to have an abiding relationship with Jesus, how to foster that and develop that, learning to walk in the Spirit and be obedient to the Spirit. So we would develop classes that would be related to that as well. You can excuse my little pop-up windows there. Let me see if I can get rid of those. Maybe not. We'll just let them sit there for now. Next, what we would see is that we're converting our Sunday school hour maybe into those discipleship classes that we just talked about there just a moment ago. We would seek outside involvement from friends, church partnerships, and other organizations. I'm currently in the process of doing that and working with other churches and people that I know to see who might want to join us in this great endeavor to think about and to do church in a different way than we've done in the past. And then we would begin to form a core team of individuals from both within the church and from outside the church to begin be a core team to get this up and running, to see micro churches or missional churches become to be developed and become more of a cornerstone of how we do ministry as a church. And so maybe the goal here by the end of the first year is that we would be able to launch 5 micro churches, 5 expressions of this kind of New Testament model of the church that come out of the life of our congregation, and others that may join us for that. And so this moves us into year 2. What would year 2 look like? Well, year 2, we could see that there's a name change to reflect our new vision. This also could happen in year 1, that likely the name of our church would change so that it's representative of this new vision of what we're trying to be about as a church. In year 2, or possibly in this year 1, we might see updates to our building as well, to equip our building to be a place that is helping equip people to be released into these expressions of the church. We would likely start beginning to see updating in how we do our worship services in year 2, possibly also in year 1 as well, making some changes there. Possibly reducing the frequency of our worship services in year 1 or year 2 as a way to provide emphasis to getting people involved and plugged in to these micro church expressions of the church. And so by the end of year 2, the hope is that, hey, we could launch maybe another 10 micro churches by the end of the second year, so that we have essentially 15 micro churches after 2 years of moving in this direction. And then moving over to year 3, which is a little covered up here by my car rental drop-off and pickup cancellation. Year 3, what we have is we have a goal here that maybe we could launch 25 micro churches at this stage after having gone through this process. And so you can see by the end of 3 years, the hope and the goal here is that we have, 15 and 20, is 40 micro churches that could potentially be launched out of the life of our church by the end of 3 years under this model of micro church, missional church empowerment and releasing people to go and to be disciples and to go and make disciples of others as well. And so that's a picture of what we're looking at. I want to encourage you again, watch this video again, take a look at the supplement, the PowerPoint slide information that I'll send on to you if you want to look at it for more information. You can feel free to reach out to me and email me. You should have my email address. And just encourage you to let me know if you have questions or other feedback that you'd like to give. And again, this will be a lot of what we'll be talking about on April 19th when Albert Hung is with us as we discuss some of these ideas in terms of vision and implementation for our church moving forward. So thank you for listening, and I hope this makes some sense, and I will look forward to being together again soon. Thanks.